This is the Brora Story. Brora, in the parish of Clyne, is a village of around 1,200 inhabitants, located on the north-east coast of Scotland. It's about an hour and a half from Inverness. The 60-mile drive, made much shorter these days, with the building of bridges over the Bewley, Cromarty and Dornoch Firths. And the A9 is now part of the much publicised North Coast 500 tourist route. 4 trains a day from Inverness each take around 2 hours and 20 minutes to reach Brora on the scenic Far North line to Wick and Thurso, the extra 30 miles being taken with loops through Dingwall and inland Sutherland via Lairg. Despite its small size, Brora boasts a fascinating, unique and diverse history and features a thriving heritage society whose chairman, Nick Lindsay, takes up the story.
Brora is only about 200 years old, and the reason for Brora being here is linked directly to the Highland Clearances. So this is a map of Brora in about 1775, and you can see that apart from the harbour area where there is one building, there is absolutely nothing in Brora, because this is what is now the A9 along here, and this is where the road bridge is today, crossing the River Brora, but there's only this building down here at the harbour. Everything else where Brora is today is just fields. So, turning the clock back to 1785, the Countess of Sutherland married the Marquis of Stafford, and when they combined their fortunes, they became the wealthiest family in Europe. He was the Marquis of Stafford, and he inherited the Duke of Bridgewater's canal fortune from England, because his uncle, the Duke of Bridgewater, hadn't any children. The fortune went sideways and down the way to the Marquis. And with the Countess's lands in Sutherland, they decided to improve Sutherland, and they put a scheme together whereby they decided to remove all the people who lived in the straths, in their townships where they'd lived for hundreds of years before, in their family groups, and they removed them from these lands and placed them on coastal settlements, brand new coastal settlements around the coast of Sutherland. And Brora is one of those places. It was a planned village to receive people from the clearances. And so people were resettled there. Many chose to emigrate, so this was quite a brutal and a forceful eviction of people from their original lifestyles, and they had to carve out a new life down in these coastal settlements, and Brora was one of those. So they were allocated small strips of land. They were called lots, and the lots had never been cultivated before, so they were full of stones. They were evicted in May. They had to build a house, a brand new house on their lot. They had to cultivate the ground, remove all the stones, plant their crops, manure the ground, fertilize it, all before the winter came. And so it was a really ramshackle process. The houses were often rebuilt about 10, 20 years later, but they had to make do for the first season.
The Marquis of Stafford's 1811 map of Brora clearly shows the small parcels of land, or lots, laid out in rows on the south side of the Brora River. Crofters, forcibly cleared from inland Sutherland, would make way for the Marquis to introduce large-scale and more profitable sheep farming. About 15 miles inland from Brora, near Rogart, is a fine example of visible remains of a cleared settlement. In the now lonely valley of the Letty River can be seen the outlines of crofts, long houses, barns and crop enclosures. Back in 1819, the Marquis of Stafford ordered the removal of the 20 tenant crofters of Letty, giving them a year to leave whilst not allowing them to grow any crops. Many left for the coast, while others eventually emigrated to Canada. All that can be seen today are the stone outlines of the buildings.
One of the reasons why Brora was such a popular place to come, because there was work here. Brora had a coal mine. It's the most northerly coal mine in Britain, and this is some of the Brora coal. This is Jurassic coal, so the rest of the British coal field, the closest of which is about 180 miles away in Fife, works on Carboniferous coal, which is older. This is Jurassic coal. It's not as good quality. It's quite sulphurous and smoky when it burns. It was used domestically, but it was great for industry. So because Brora had this unique fuel resource, it set up a brick factory, made Brora bricks because there was an adjacent clay pit next to the Brora coal mine. And on the other side, it's actually got, so the front side says Brora, and the back side says best. Brora's best. In 1819, the Clynelish Distillery was set up at Clynelish, and the Brora coal was used to fire the Clynelish Distillery boilers in the production of whisky. So the brickworks used the Brora coal, which was adjacent to the coal mine, to fuel the kilns. Down at the beach, we used to make salt. This is some salt which was recreated in a reproduction salt pan that we've built here at the Brora Heritage Centre. We did this in 2021. But they would make a stone hearth down at the beach, put an iron pan on top of it about the size of a single bed, fill that with seawater, and then light the coal fire underneath, and the seawater would evaporate and leave the salt. And the salt was used to preserve the salmon which they caught in the River Brora and Loch Brora, and the product was sailed out from Brora Harbour, and it would go to the continent or down to London. So you get Brora salmon on the continent. And we've actually got records from 1658 from a Belgian traveller who came to Brora, and he recorded in his journal that they were barrelling up salmon and sending them to France. So from 1658 we know Brora salmon was going to the continent. And from 1901, a gentleman called Thomas Murray Hunter, he set up the Brora woolen mill, or the Sutherland woolen mill, and his factory produced world-famous quality tweeds. These were used by gamekeepers for their effectively a state uniform, and they made, during the wars, they made blankets and uniforms for the military. And the Brora coal was used for the production of electricity in the factory to generate the mill machinery. And from 1913, Brora coal generated the electricity in Hunter's woolen mill, and Thomas Hunter sold his surplus electricity to the parish council, and the parish council lit their street lights with Brora coal generated electricity. And we became known as Electric City on the back of that, because we had the most bright lights in the north. This is 25 years before Maine's electricity arrived. So Brora has got an amazing, unique history in the Highlands. Nowhere else has this industrial heritage, and we've got it all here at Brora Heritage Centre. So there was when we excavated the salt pans. These date from 1598, and we excavated these from the building. You can see the building here, and these blocks below are these blocks which were the entrances to the rooms in the 1598 salt pans. So we had 5 years of archaeological excavations, and this was one particular year excavating this building. So this is a building about 15 metres long, divided into two. This room in this building, we think that the worker, the salt pan manager, sat because he had a coal fire here. We think this is where the salt was stored. This was called a gurnal, where the salt was stored after it was made. It was obviously a precious commodity because there's a windowsill here, and in the windowsill there's a hole for a steel bar, so it was a protected premises, so people couldn't break in and steal any of the commodity. But these are the door jambs for that 1598 building, and they've got a very unusual symbol carved on the front here, which is an inverted triangle with a line down the middle. And there are two of them. There's one on this door jamb, and there's another on this door jamb too. And we don't know why, because they're prominent, they're facing outwards. We don't think it's a mason's mark, because a mason would generally have them in such a prominent place. So we think they're the Sutherland Estate symbol, because this is a Sutherland Estate building. And if we look around here, this is a picture of the fireplace in the salt manager's office, workshop, if you like. It's cracked in two, so we had to support it with timber rods, but this is the actual lintel here we have on display, and it's got some carved symbols. It's actually picked out better in the picture. So on the fireplace lintel, somebody's carved these symbols, and they're believed to be, there's a word for it which is very difficult to pronounce, but they're witches' symbols. So you carve these symbols on the lintel, and they're supposed to prevent witches coming down the chimney and scaring the inhabitants. Because you could close the doors, you could close the windows, but you couldn't close the chimney, and that was the only way for witches to get into the building. This is Brora coal. You've seen this before. So we have records of people picking coal out on the beach from 1529, because the coal seam outcropped on the beach, but the coal seam dipped shallowly inland. So I'll do that again actually. The coal seam dipped shallowly inland. So this is the land surface, and this is the coal seam. The further inland you went, the deeper you had to get to access the coal. And they did sink shallow pits. They're called bell pits because they sank a shaft and they worked out as far as they could. And it was precarious because we have a record of one pit collapsing, killing 15 men. And that was about 30 yards deep, so we think they probably gave it up as a bad idea then. So from 1598, they were mining coal. 1777 is the last time they mined that area. The Marquis of Stafford, who later became the first Duke of Sutherland, he sank a deep mine just below the Brora Heritage Centre. It was 240 feet deep. He hit the coal at 240 feet, and they mined that from 1810 to when it finally closed, intermittently till 1974. And we had a visit from this gentleman. This is the Duke of Edinburgh. He's a tall man, as you probably are aware, but he had to crouch down in some of the galleries because some of the galleries down there were pretty low. This is the mine manager at the time. So he visited on the 1st of May 1963. And this is the ramshackle cage that the miners used to go down in. And the Duke of Edinburgh went down in this cage, 243 feet deep in this cage. The workings closed in 1974, not because they ran out of coal, but because the oil industry in the North Sea was taking off, and there was a fabrication yard, an oil rig fabrication yard in a place called Nig, which is about 30 miles from here. And they sucked out all the workforce because they were paid so much better in wages down there than they could ever afford to earn in the coal mine. So some of the people got 10 times more money working in the oil industry than they were in the coal mine or the brickworks or the distillery. And the workforce just almost overnight left. And the coal mine and the brickworks closed in 1974.
I did hear some story about the reason why coal exporting stopped from Brora by ship because of an incident involving a fire. Is that right?
There was an incident involving Brora coal. It had a tendency to spontaneously combust on exposure to air. So they would mine the coal, bring it up to the surface and stockpile it on site, and sometimes it caught fire, just as a chemical reaction with the minerals in the coal, a lot of iron, pyrites and sulphur, and the air. Didn't happen all the time, but it had a tendency to do that. And one shipment, which was going across from Brora Harbour to the Murray Firth, across the other side of the Murray Firth, it actually caught fire in the mid of the Firth and sank, and Brora got a very bad reputation for its coal. However, later, the new mine manager, he actually did a bit of marketing and PR, and he said this is new coal and it doesn't have the same problems. In actual fact, it did, but it was just a marketing ploy. This is in the 1700s, so marketing is not a new tool.
Nick now describes three of Brora's interesting characters, starting with Charles Hood.
Charles Hood was a tenant farmer in Brora, which was one of the first farms created after the clearances. He was born in Berwickshire, at a place called Eccles, in 1796 or 1797. And he came to tenant the farm at Brora after the clearances. And he married a local girl, Dorothy Reed, in 1841. And sadly, he died of liver disease in 1862. But in his life in Brora, he was a very prominent man. He was known as Charles Hood Esquire. He was afforded that privilege on the censuses. Anybody else didn't have the Esquire on their names. But he was very interested in farming and rearing cattle, and he was a very prominent exhibitor of his cattle and won lots of prizes at Highland shows and shows in Edinburgh as well. He took his cattle down all the way to Edinburgh, took them on the boat. But he was also the local captain of the Sutherland Volunteers, the Highland Rifles, the Sutherland Highland Rifles, and he was very involved in the local home defence they were set up as. So he would organise all the men and their training sessions and their shooting sessions, and if any active service ever arose, and it didn't obviously, but he would be responsible for commanding his Brora company of rifle volunteers.
And the Sutherland riflemen were again associated or involved with the Duke of Sutherland? What was his role in that?
Yeah, every village in Sutherland had its own company, or every village in East Sutherland had its own company of volunteers, and they would take part in ceremonial displays at Dunrobin Castle, and they would compete in shooting competitions with each other. And in times of crisis, they would have all formed, amalgamated to form a fighting unit. That never came to fruition, but they were very competitive in their competitions with their fellow volunteer regiments.
But I did read that the regiments were formed because of a fear of French invasion.
They were actually formed because of the fear of a Napoleonic invasion, which didn't ever come to place. But it was a home guard effectively, because all the fighting men were away in battles with Napoleon's French forces, but the home guard were formed to defend the British shores. So this happened countrywide, and Captain Hood was in charge of the Brora company of volunteers.
On the 6th of June 1859, a meeting was held at the Golspie Inn for the purpose of organising a corps of volunteers for the defence of the country. The chair of the meeting was Mr. Charles Hood of Brora, and the Lord Stafford, later 3rd Duke of Sutherland, who it is said was respectfully asked to join the volunteers as commandant. Today, the Golspie Inn is a well-known stop on the A9, and the building across the road was the drill hall for those 19th century volunteers. The Donaldson family included William, the village druggist, one of whose sons was Alexander.
So Alec Donaldson was born in 1883, and he was the son of a druggist, a chemist, and they operated a chemist and a grocer's shop, and so he grew up in a family of merchants and traders and chemists. But he signed up in 1914, more than likely with the Seaforth Highlanders when all the men went to war in 1914. We don't know much about his war service, but we think he came back with what we now know as PTSD. A lot of men came back with what they called shell shock in those days, but we would now know it as PTSD. But there was no support for the soldiers who came back from the front, and people were just left to get on with it in their own particular way. Alec's way was to drop out of society, and he actually found a new life living in a cave, or it's actually an overhang rather than a cave, but he lived down near the beach, just to the south of Brora itself, built his own little canvas shelter under this overhang, and lived the life of a hermit for almost the rest of his life. And he was a very well-known, very well-liked person, but he preferred his own company. He would walk along the railway line into Brora, which is the quickest way. He would avoid the trains, obviously, get his shopping in the village and walk back. And there's a great story when he was great friends with the Macbeth family who stayed on the Dol, which is close to where his little cave was. And every time he went shopping, he would leave his bag hanging over the fence there, walk into town, get the shopping, come back, and the bag would be full of eggs and fresh baking, baked by the Macbeth family, and he would always go in for a plate of soup as well. So he was well looked after by the community, but he just chose to live this hermit lifestyle. And he was quite happy that the children loved going down to see him. He was great with the kids, and they loved it, and he would play with them for hours, and there was no sign of anything inappropriate. It was just all good, clean fun, and the kids loved building dens down there and living in his little tent. He was a very popular person, but he chose to live his own private lifestyle.
Fortunately, a few years ago, Alec Donaldson's old friend, the late George Macbeth, took Nick along the coast south of Brora to find Alec's overhang.
Hi, this is Alec Donaldson's cave. As you say, Nick, not very grand.
It's not very grand.
No.
So he had canvas?
He had big deer fence posts at the front here.
Right.
And canvas on the outsides, keeping the wind from going in. And he had his fire. Out there. And the fire was inside, but he had these logs out there. And he was outside and he was pushing the logs in as they were burning.
Well, like a whole timber?
Aye, I never cut anything. Just took the whole limb from the wood with him, you know.
Aye.
But this is in the place of my old friend Alec Donaldson. He's a nice old man, but gentle. He'd have funny laugh, you know.
Could he?
So he'd have comical laugh, aye. But he was harmless.
And roughly how long was he here for, do you know?
Well, hello, young days. But that'll be quite sport.
Well,
Eddie, his brother, was in the lap of luxury in Holland.
did he?
Oh, aye. Not a luxury boy. He had a hand farm out in Holland.
Right.
In December 2023, the Heritage Society received its first major payment towards the project to repurpose the old Brora School building into a new Heritage Centre. Now with over £5 million from 13 different funders, the new facility, which is right beside the A9 NC 500 road, is due to open in the late summer of 2025.